When I first started making money, I had zero clue where my next dollar should go. I was saving, investing, and paying down debt all at the same time with no real strategy. And once I actually learned a clear financial order, I felt like my decision making just got way simpler and my progress actually sped up way quicker. So today I'm going to walk you through the exact process of where should your next dollar go? Should you save it? Should you invest it? Should you save up for a house? What should you do? So before we jump into the video, comment down below, what is your current financial priority? Are you trying to save for a house? Are you just trying to save up some cash? Do you want to invest? Do you want to pay down debt? And I'm curious if your mind changes by the end of the video. So go ahead and comment that down below. Now, one thing I really want to highlight and preface here before we jump into the video is I actually follow the exact same order and I got this from this channel. It is a pretty large YouTube channel. These guys are legit financial advisors, and that is the Money Guy Show. So what I'm sharing with you guys today, I do not take credit for. This entire process is called the financial order of operations, and I really believe it is the most optimal thing. I think it's better than Dave Ramsey or any other people that I've seen online. So I got to give them credit where credit is due because they 100% made this, but I do try my best to stick to it. So the first thing you want to do is save up a little bit of money. That way your deductibles are covered because this is going to protect against just small BS that you have to deal with in your day-to-day life. When it comes to building wealth, some of the first dollars that you're using, you're not actually using it to invest and build wealth. You're using it to protect yourself towards financial disasters or just little things that can happen. Because before you even put a dollar into the stock market, I do feel like it's good to have a small safety buffer, not to make money, but just to stop life from putting you into debt every time something small breaks or something little happens. So this isn't investing money. This is just purely protection money. This could be anywhere from $300 to $500 to about $1,000. It's definitely not a full emergency fund. Like I said, it is just a cushion for the small things that will hit you in life, whether that's something like a flat tire or a medical bill, or maybe your car needs a repair, just kind of things like that. And the main goal of having your deductibles covered is to prevent any new debt being incurred from small emergencies. So you don't want to go into debt when you have a $300 expense pop up that you weren't expecting. And a lot of people starting out tend to skip this step because they just feel like it's boring or oh, my money's not growing for me. But I feel like it is a very useful thing that a lot of people need to do. There's a ton of real world examples I'm sure that you can think of over the past year where it was a small thing that came up, whether it was a car repair or maybe an insurance deductible, or like I said, it could be a flat tire and you have to get a new tire, a new set of tires, things like that. And if you don't have the small buffer, then every time you have a problem, you're going to have to go into debt for it because like I said, you don't have any extra money. You have to swipe that credit card to cover these expenses, and you do not want to do that. You want to have a little bit of cash on the side there. And not only is this going to give you a little bit of a financial cushion, but it's definitely going to give you a little bit of a psychological benefit because you're going to invest a lot more confidently when little small things are covered and you don't even have to think about them or stress them because you already know, I've already checked that box. I'm good. I do not need to stress about this. One way I was kind of thinking about that I could explain this is it's almost like if you go into a boss fight, in a video game, you could have the best weapons in the world, but if you have no armor, you're screwed. You're not going to win that fight. You got to have the armors, you got to have the health pots, you know what I mean? You want to go into it prepared. So making sure you have those small emergencies or those deductibles covered is super important. So once you check that box off, once you have that covered, the next thing you're going to want to do is focus on your employer match. This is a guaranteed win, and you really want to take advantage of this. This could be something like a 401k match, which is what it is for most people who work corporate jobs, but there are also other types of jobs that have similar accounts to a 401k. So there's one called a 403b, which is, for teachers or people that work in hospitals or different nonprofits. There's also something called a 457 plan for different government workers. I believe this is cops, firefighters, things like that. And then there's also a health savings account called an HSA, and some employers do match on that. So regardless of what your plan your employer is, you want to get that match because it is literally free money. Now, let me kind of just break down the numbers and explain here. It is a potentially 50 to 100% return depending on your company's match. So let's say an employer matches 6% of your pay if you contribute 6%. And let's just pretend we're talking about a 401k here. So let's pretend you make $50,000 a year and you put in 6% of your salary. So that's going to be $3,000. Then your employer will also match you on that, and they're going to also put $3,000 in, which is amazing because you genuinely didn't have to do anything. You didn't have to invest anything, and you just saw your money double instantly. Now, this is not every employer. Some employers have, different 401k plans where it's they might do 50% up to 6%. So that would be if you put in your 3K, then they would match 1,500. So regardless of what the match structure is you want to take advantage of this because it is literally free money. That is the easiest way to explain it. So if you don't know if your company has a 401k match, usually you could reach out to your manager or HR. They should be able to provide you more information on that. And I really do think that the 401k match is such a slept on tool for building wealth. Once you start getting into the higher salary ranges, the 100K, 150, 200K, 200K, 6% of 200K, that's a shit ton of money. That's 12,000, and then they're matching 12, So once you get into those higher higher brackets, then it really starts to help big time. But even if it's just something as simple as you putting in 3,000 and they match 3,000, or even if you put in 3,000 and they match 1,500, there's a big difference between $3,000 being invested a year versus 4,500. Especially if that compounds over 20 or 30 years, it can make a huge gap in wealth. So you definitely want to be taking advantage of this. And some people tend to avoid the 401k match because they just have a fear of market volatility. They don't want to put money in and see it go away, or they just don't understand retirement accounts at all and they don't even know that they have a 401k match, or just any type of employer match. So you definitely want to take advantage of this if you can, because in order for this to grow and compound over time, yeah, you're going to invest it, but in the meantime with the match, you're just basically collecting free money, like I said. And you can do this even while you're paying debt. You could still prioritize the match if you want to, because it's going to build a ton of momentum early on, and it can really show the power of just automated investing. And one thing I did want to mention, that if your company does have a match, whether it's a 401k or whatever the account is that you could match with, some employers do have something called a vesting period, meaning you may have to work at the company for a certain amount of time in order to get the full match. So for example, let's pretend you put in your 3,000, let's say they match 3,000, okay? But let's say you leave the company after 1 year, their $3,000 match may go away. And that is entirely dependent on their vesting schedule. So what I mean by this is basically their match will slowly vest over time. It becomes your money over time. So let's say after 2 years, you get 50% of the match. Okay, well, you put in at that point, you put in 3,000 the first year, 3,000 the second year, you're all good there. That's your money. They cannot touch that. But if they match 3,000 the first year and 3,000 the second year, and then you have a 50% vesting, that means that you put in 6,000, they put in 6,000. But if you were to leave at that point after year 2, you would only get $3,000. You'd only get half of that because of the vesting period. So that is, I try to simplify it as much as possible, but just be sure to look at that, because some companies will get you with that. You'll think that you're getting that match, and then you leave after a year or two and all that money that they match just goes away. And this actually happened to me, but it was a huge pay jump, so it made more sense for me to move jobs. Do not let that lock you in either. Just try to run the math on it if you can. So now that you got that small cushion for the deductibles, and then you got your free money from the match, the next thing that we are going to focus on is what destroys a ton of people's progress, and that is high interest debt. If this game of life feels like a battlefield and you want to win the war and you want to plant your flag and feel victorious, you cannot be running around just bleeding out. You're not going to outrun high interest debt with investing. I don't care if you're investing in gold, the S&P 500, Bitcoin, because when it comes to high interest debt, that is a guaranteed negative return. If you have $10,000 on a credit card and it is compounding against you at 20%, that's a guaranteed 20% interest that you're paying. Compared to when I talk about the S&P 500 going and getting 10% a year, and that's the average return, that's an average. It's not guaranteed it's going to be 10% a year. Some years it might be negative 20%. Some years it might be positive 20%. But when it comes to high interest debt, that is guaranteed. These are things like credit cards, payday loans, just anything where the interest rate is, I would say, above 10%, honestly. And credit cards tend to be the worst of it because their interest rates are so high. They are normally between 20 to 30%. And like I said a second ago, it is just interest that is compounding against you. And a lot of people make this mistake of trying to invest while they're still holding 20% interest rate credit card debt. Like, you got to just get rid of that as soon as possible. And some people even try to make like this arbitrage argument, like, oh, I'm going to get more than 20% a year, so I'm actually optimizing my finances. Bro, no, you're not. Like, I do not care if you're buying index funds, gold, crypto. It does not matter. You will not out compound high interest debt. You just won't. And when debt is paid off, that is the equivalent to just a risk-free return. Like, you're just getting rid of that. And not only that, it's going to create a lot more momentum, because let's pretend that you're paying $200 a month in, minimum credit card payments because you have thousands of dollars out there on a credit card. Once you pay off that credit card, you no longer are paying that $200 a month. So you can then do whatever you want with it. You could save it, you could invest it. That is money that is, getting back in your pocket, and you do not have to stress it anymore. And it is a huge psychological win when you do not have high interest debt. It gives you a lot more clarity. It is going to reduce a ton of stress when it comes to finances, and it's going to increase your cash flow, like what I just talked about. So once that high interest debt is gone, now you can finally start to create like real stability. And that starts with an emergency fund. Now, like I talked about before, I'm not here to, build a ton of wealth immediately. Emergency funds, they're not there to make you rich. They are there to protect you in case of an emergency, obviously. And when it comes to emergency funds, I tend to put mine into a high yield savings account. That way I could get a little bit of interest on that money that I have set aside for an emergency. Now, for my personal high yield savings account, I use Capital One. That is what has worked best for me. There are a ton of really good companies out there for it. So just look into it and do a little bit of research. So when you have an emergency fund, this is going to protect you against any type of job loss. Because, let's say you lose your job, but you have 6 months of your monthly expenses saved up. It's going to create, a lot less stress. You're going to feel a lot more comfortable because cash is king in that regard. It's also going to protect you against, let's say you have a medical surprise. Let's say you have to go into the hospital, and before you know it, it's, $2,000 bill, or, a big car thing pops up. Like, I've had that a lot recently where I'm dealing with car shit, and, it's $1,500, $1,800, $3,000, things like that, it is perfect to have an emergency fund for those sort of things. And it's also going to protect against if your income is disrupted. So what I mean by that is, let's say you're a business owner and you had a really good 2025. You're making 10K a month, right? But then let's say this year it's starting out a little bit slower and you're getting 2 or 3K. You can also lean on the emergency fund a little bit for that if your income just fluctuates a lot. Now, obviously you want to be as consistent as possible, but things happen, life happens. That's just how it goes. And the thing that's really nice about having an emergency fund is it's going to prevent you from panic selling any of your investments when shit goes south. And a lot of investors fail because they're forced to sell during downturns. And the main reason they're forced to sell is because they don't have a huge pile of cash to protect them. And so cash is going to give you that psychological security. It's going to give you that safety net, and it's going to allow you to maintain a long-term investing mindset. In this stage of things, although it's not pretty, although it's not fun, it is going to help you build confidence. That way you can take calculated risk later on. So now that we have taken care of the financial survival of things, let's actually talk about like real wealth building tools, which is going to be step number 5 here. And that is the tax-free growth machines. I'm talking about the Roth IRA and the HSA, because taxes matter a lot over a long period of time. You can sit there and get 10 or 20% a year, but if you're not optimizing your taxes when you go to retire, it can definitely bite you in the ass. And so I made an entire video talking about the Roth IRA. Feel free to go check that out. But basically, you're going to pay taxes now on your money. You're going to put your money into the Roth IRA. You're going to invest that money. And then when you go to retire and you pull that money out, let's say you're 60 years old, you don't have to pay any taxes on that. And the thing that's nice with the Roth IRA is along the way, you can also start to withdraw your contributions if you need to. So I try not to do that. I have never done that, but with the contributions this year, it is $7,500. So that is just something that you should know. And then on top of the Roth IRA, there's something called an HSA, which is a health savings account. I should probably make an entire video on this. Unfortunately, my employer's HSA system completely sucks because you have to get over a certain dollar amount. And then even then, when you want to invest the money from the HSA, they don't have fractional shares, basically. It is just a pain in the ass. But long story short, the HSA gives you a triple tax advantage, and you can use this money for medical expenses later on down the road. And when it comes to these tax advantage accounts, younger investors, they're going to benefit the most. The people that are 18, 20, 25, 30, because it's going to give you just decades of compounding, which is huge. If anybody understands compound interest, the longer that time horizon, the better. And it gives you a lot more flexibility versus like traditional retirement accounts. And also, like I said before, the Roth contributions, you can access those at any time. So let's say for some reason you're not listening to me and you don't have an emergency fund. Let's say you put $14,000 into your Roth. You could pull $1,000 out if you needed to. So it's not like that money is completely locked away. You can always pull the contributions out, the money that you have put in. But these two accounts, they're going to give you future tax protection, and they're going to give you a lot of flexibility when it comes to your financial strategy. So assuming you've done those 5 steps, now you can really start to accelerate your wealth by maxing out your employer plans. And this is where your money starts compounding very aggressively. I will admit, I'm just going to be honest with you guys, this part I do deviate from a little bit, and I'll explain why in just a moment. But when I'm talking about maxing out the employer plans, I'm saying at first we got the 401k match, then let's say we maxed out the Roth IRA, maxed out the HSA, then you go back and you max out the 401k. That's essentially what this is saying here. And the max for that, I believe, is like $24,000 or $23,500, or it's quite a bit of money. So just between the Roth and the 401k, if you max both of those out, that's over $30,000. And when it comes to the 401k being maxed out, you could, let's say you make $100k a year, and let's say you put the max amount in, which I can't remember exactly if it's 24 or 24.5, it's around that, but you can still get the match on top of that. So let's say, you put your $6,000 in, your employer matches, and then you keep investing. You're still going to get the $6,000 on top of the max amount in the 401k. So that is why it's a very serious wealth building tool, because the more money you invest, the larger that engine is growing. It's like a snowball rolling down a hill. That thing is just going to get bigger and bigger. And when it comes to maxing out your employer plans, it is going to give you a ton of tax deferral advantages. It does automate investing, which completely reduces emotional mistakes because your money's just getting pulled out of your paychecks. You're not even really thinking about it. It's getting invested for you. And a lot of people never actually reach this stage due to lifestyle inflation. So if you can avoid that as much as possible, that is very important. And I genuinely think that this is where some of those higher earning people, that's when they start to separate themselves long term. It's the people that are maxing out the Roth, the 401k, the HSA, and then on top of that, they're throwing money into the brokerage. Like that's when you're investing a ton of money every year. And the compounding is going to be very noticeable if you're maxing out these employer plans. Now for me, I get my 401k match. I definitely max out my Roth. Like I said, my HSA, it's kind of wonky at my company, so I just don't deal with that, although I wish it was a lot more simplified. But the reason I then don't go back and max out my 401k is because I just like to have the extra cash flow. If I'm putting $24,000 a year into my 401k, don't get me wrong, that is phenomenal, but I do like just having that money. And I also understand that I am missing out on some tax advantages by doing this. And one thing I should also mention is because I have a Roth 401k, meaning I pay taxes up front on that. That way I do not have to pay taxes later. I'm definitely going to make an HSA and a 401k video, hopefully sometime in the next month or two, and I will talk exactly about that. But just so you guys know, that is the main reason I don't do that, is because I just prefer to have the extra cash and then I can invest it into my brokerage. But these are the steps that I do feel are the most optimal. And I do understand that I am deviating from being extremely, financially optimal. And that's okay. At the end of the day, you got to do what works for you. So those are the first 6 steps. Now jumping into step 7, this is what they call the hyperaccumulation phase. This is where you have all of your savings basically covered. You have a cushion, you have an emergency fund, you've maxed the Roth, you max the HSA, you max the 401k. Now you're investing into your brokerage account, which is a normal taxable account. And the goal here is very similar to the other steps, just to put as much money in as possible. And the reason that we focus on this goal last is because some of the other ones have tax advantages, which is super important over 10, 20, 30 plus years. So once you've already optimized all those tax advantages, now we can go into the more taxable investing. You really just want to focus on long-term equity growth here. And what I mean by this is just buying like an index fund that tracks the market. And like I've said in all my videos, I'm not a financial advisor. This is not professional financial advice, but this is just what works for me. And one thing you want to really focus on here is trying to grow your income as much as possible, because at this point, your compound interest is going to be accelerating dramatically. I mean, if you're investing $30,000, $40,000 plus a year, I mean, think about that. Within 2 years, that's $80,000. Within 5 years, that is $200,000 being invested. And so if that $200,000 you invested is compounding at, 8%, 9%, 10% a year over 20 or 30 years, that is going to turn into a ridiculous amount of money. I'm talking not even 1 or 2 million. I'm talking 5, 6, 8, $10 million. So the compound interest accelerates very quickly at this stage. And if you can get to this phase of the financial order of operations, then you are going to be starting to look at, could you retire early, or what does that look like for you? So you can really start to look more at your financial independence timelines, which is really awesome. So that's step 7. Now, step 8 is going to be to prepay your future expenses. Now, this is more of a strategic thing. So not all saving is investing. Some saving actually just protects your future flexibility. So these are things like a house down payment or a major purchase like a car, or if you have a big planned life event, such as a wedding or maybe a vacation. And this is just going to help you avoid selling any investments for short-term needs. And it's going to also just give you a lot more strategic cash positioning. Now, the thing that's kind of interesting about this step or this phase is that step 7 is like uncapped. Like you can invest as much money as possible, but you definitely want to still enjoy life if possible. So that was even one goal I said earlier in a couple of videos ago, is that I want to focus on being able to, budget more for my vacations as they start to come up. And when you start prepaying your future expenses, this is the difference between planned expenses versus like emotional purchases. Like you're really being calculated about your money and just every step along the way. And this is going to also allow your long-term investments to just remain untouched, and you're just going to let them sit there and just compound and just grow on top of themselves. So that is the 8th step. Now the 9th and final step here, and this is more of just a personal choice thing, is prepaying any low interest debt. And so this is where the psychology can just outweigh pure math. I understand the math here is not most optimal, but this is like paying off something like a low, interest rate on a mortgage or a low interest rate student loan. And, the investing, it could outperform mathematically, but paying off the debt here, it's going to reduce stress. It's going to increase your cash flow, and it's also going to improve your risk tolerance because you don't have, monthly expenses coming in. And this step honestly is a lot more about personal goals. It's not as much about optimizing things. It's basically the argument of financial freedom versus financial optimization. So it really just depends what you want to do here. So that is how I focus on where I'm going to allocate my next dollar. And this is the order and the structure that I try to stick to every single time I get paid, month in and month out. And I feel like this setup here really just answers like, hey, where should my next dollar go? And the main takeaway that I want you guys to know is that the order of this matters a lot more than specific investments. Being successful with your money, it is a lot less about complexity and, trying to just be a genius with money. It's more just about your sequence and knowing what you need to prioritize over other things. So I definitely want to encourage you guys to try to figure out like what step are you on of this financial order of operations, and really think about what is your next financial move. So that is it from me. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, drop a like down below, hit that subscribe button. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.